I've described that feeling of being encouraged, especially after what for a lot of people I'm sure was an incredibly upsetting election. I'll talk of my own experience. I felt very, I've used the word traumatized about the election because it was very scary for me. I spent a lot of time, what I've termed now fear crime, after the election. But I wanted to point out something that I think is really important to put words to, which is that as a culture we talk a lot about PTSD and how trauma impacts people in negative ways. But I also want to make sure that we have space to talk about post-traumatic growth as well, which is what happens when people after a traumatic event feel like they know what's important to them. They're more courageous and able to be themselves. They're less likely to care what other people think. And I'm hoping that that growth is something that we all can tap into, because I think that that's what will continue to fuel this movement. I'm very excited to introduce a very famous drag performer, drag queen from Rhode Island. I think it's easy sometimes because drag performers are often entertainers, they're fun. I think it's often really easy to sort of put them in a category where we forget how incredibly important their leadership is, their intelligence, their connection to community, and the wisdom that they bring to our collective work. So I'm excited to introduce Jacqueline DiMera and hear what she has to say of our movement as well. So.
Thank you, Kara. That was quite an oversell. I cannot live up to that. Good night. Thank you, Kara, so much for that wonderful introduction to First Lady, First Gentleman. I'm the First Lady. I forget that. I am the First Lady of Rhode Island now, and First Gentleman, Buffett, Mayor Lorza, Dr. Alexander Scott, Paul, my fellow Rhode Islanders. Yes, I am Jacqueline DiMera, but my name is also Anthony DeRose. And Jacqueline DiMera, Rhode Island drag sweetheart that you see before. Let me just say how honored I am to be speaking here today at the State House to mark World AIDS Day. I had always hoped that I would have the opportunity to speak in this great room here for a good cause. I just never imagined that I would be doing it in full drag in the middle of the day. But as we have come to know here in Rhode Island, there is always a first for everything. Isn't that correct, First Gentleman? I do want to say that I am optimistic by many of the statistics and news that I'm hearing today, and it does give us hope that moving forward with the leadership of all the mayors and Mayor Lorza and Governor Raimondo, that we can achieve all of our goals, and it's good to be optimistic in this time of uncertainty. HIV, AIDS, it's scary, isn't it? I'm sure it's scarier to those who wake up each day dealing with the challenges of living with it. But thanks to constant discoveries of new treatments and medications, plus the availability of programs and services by organizations such as AIDS Care Ocean State and AIDS Project Rhode Island, it makes those challenges a little less hard and a little less scary. In the 1980s, the world was introduced to this new virus, a virus that no one ever heard of. No one knew where it came from or even how to treat it. Quickly, this virus became an epidemic, and it took many people, friends and family alike, away from us much too soon. It was an epidemic that even our own government turned its back on its citizens. People who were scared, who are dying and in their time of need. Now, over 30 years later, with the uncertainty of what lies ahead with the incoming presidential administration, the feeling of uneasiness returns, striking the hearts of the HIV, AIDS, and LGBTQ communities. I'd like to share a little personal story. Shortly after I came out, I started talking to this really nice guy. And however, every time we made plans to meet up, he always needed to cancel. Finally, one day on his birthday, I found out that he was spending it alone, and I certainly was not going to let that happen. So I drove down to Cape Cod in the middle of a horrible rainstorm. We had dinner, we laughed, we talked about our families, enjoyed each other's company. At the end of the night, I asked why he would always need to break our previous plans, especially considering that we had such a great time together. He told me it was because he thought I would be scared when he told me that he was HIV positive. Now, here was the very first person I knew that had HIV. I had just come out. I didn't know anybody. What was I going to do? Do I run? Do I stay? I turned to him and I said, "So?" And I gave him a hug. I didn't see him as a case study or as a virus. I saw him for the sweet, funny, caring guy that I had a wonderful evening with. 13 years later, memories filled with laughter and tears and vacations and falling asleep on the couch while watching really bad movies, and even being the best man at his wedding, Ryan is one of my best friends till this day. I tell you this story not for just a quick trip down memory lane, but to always remind us about the human face of HIV and AIDS. There are friends, there are family, and there are loved ones. Because of Ryan and so many others that I care about, for those who need a little love in their lives, I stand here today in a dress. For more than 9 years I have worked as Jacqueline DiMera, lip-syncing my heart out, meeting with people in clubs and events across the state, raising funds to help continue the vital services provided by AIDS Care Ocean State and AIDS Project Rhode Island, and raising awareness of HIV and AIDS. I do it for the sheer fact that we all know that not every story ends up with a happy ending like mine and Ryan's. We have Rhode Islanders, our neighbors, who are sick and scared, some with no family or even a roof over their heads. These folks are from all walks of life, black and white, gay and straight, young and old, rich and poor. HIV and AIDS doesn't just happen to certain people, and not because those people were careless. For a case in point, my good friend Ryan was diagnosed with HIV after a blood transfusion he received at a hospital after a surgery. Now more than ever, we need to be supporting these organizations and not cutting necessary funding needed to provide the services that are so desperately needed to so many. To quote one of my favorite speeches from the movie The American President, "We have serious problems to solve, and we need serious people to solve them." Now, whatever your particular problem is, I promise you that people like the President and Vice President-elect are not the least bit interested in solving it. They are interested in two things and two things only: making you afraid of it and telling you who's to blame for it. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you win elections. You gather a group of middle-aged, middle-class, middle-income voters who remember or fantasize with longing a time that seemed easier for folks like them, and you talk to them about family and American values and character, and you scream about patriotism, and you tell them that someone else is to blame for their lot in life. Well, the fear and hate stops now. For the HIV, AIDS, and LGBT communities will gather and march and fight, whether it's here on Smith Hill or in Washington on Capitol Hill, to ensure that every HIV and AIDS person living here in Rhode Island and across the country gets the medical and social services they need until we find a cure for this disease. And I am starting that fight today by insisting that when the General Assembly convenes in January, Speaker Mattiello places the $68,000 needed for the needle exchange program back into the state's budget. If we are going to say that we all want to make a difference, then let's put some actions to those words. I leave you with these final thoughts today on World AIDS Day, that we need and we must refocus our efforts to end the stigma around HIV and AIDS and fight that much harder in finding a cure as well as in prevention. That today would have been Matthew Shepard's 40th birthday. That 61 years ago today, Rosa Parks stood up for her civil rights. That's a lot to think about as we move forward in these uncertain times, but as Rhode Islanders, I know that we will come together and be strong and ever vigilant and stand up against hate anytime, any place. Thank you.